Welcome to Trial Talk, insights from experienced New York trial attorney Michael Joseph.
Hello and welcome to Trial Talk with experienced attorney Michael Joseph. With over 20 years of experience in personal injury, commercial litigation, and criminal defense, Michael is committed to social and economic justice. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about line of duty injuries and navigating these complexities. Michael, great to see you again.
Thank you.
Can you start by explaining the general legal landscape for police officers who suffer injuries in the line of duty in New York?
Sure. So if you're a police officer, and actually in New York State, not just the city, but if you're a police officer, the first thing you get is you get what's called your line of duty benefits. That means whatever governmental entity employs you, be it the city of New York, county of Westchester, city of White Plains, Nassau County, whatever, they have to pay all your medical bills and they have to provide your full salary while you're out. Not your overtime, but actually just your base salary. Mm-hmm. In addition, we don't really get involved in that, but what we do is there's also a law called General Municipal Law 205E. And what that does, that gives police officers the right to sue anybody who caused or contributed to their injury in any way because of a violation of law. So, for example, any violation of law that causes an officer's injuries, you can sue whoever committed that violation. If you're in a motor vehicle accident while driving a police cruiser, if anyone violated the VTL, you can sue. If you're chasing a perp down the street and the street's broken, New York City especially has an administrative code that requires landlords, commercial landlords, anything other than a 1 or 2 family home, to keep the sidewalk in front of their properties in good repair. So if they violated that rule, you can sue the building owner. There's a number of these different laws. If you're injured restraining a drunk person, they became intoxicated at a bar, we have dram shop laws. So you can actually go after the bar that caused them to become highly intoxicated and violent. So there's a number of different laws that a police officer can sue for. Now, in addition, one of the other areas we see a lot of is officers injured by stolen cars or cars that are being used without authorization, or even hit and runs, for example, with a lot of these mopeds and e-bikes. So what happens in that scenario? Well, usually there's either no insurance because the insurance disclaims, or it's being used without authorization, so the insurance isn't really responsible. So interestingly, New York has provisions which are called uninsured motorist provisions. That means anybody who owns a car, your own insurance company has coverage for you in case you get hit by an uninsured motorist. So that actually applies to police officers. We've done a lot of cases, actually, where police officers are hit by cars that are either stolen, or, for example, another common example is when police officers make a stop and they approach the car and the car takes off and they don't get a license plate and it hits them while fleeing. And they just can't catch it, or they get a partial plate and they can't identify it. In that case, the police officer can actually make an application to their own insurance company to get paid benefits for pain and suffering. And really, it depends on how much coverage they have on their own personal policies, because a police car is actually exempt from having to cover uninsured motorists. So it falls back to the officer's own car or any car in their household.
And we talked a little bit before we hit record about that police officers don't get workers' compensation. So how does the law differentiate between police officers and typical workers' compensation claims?
Okay, so police officers are actually treated a little more favorably than average workers. So, for example, an average worker, anyone who has a job with a private employer, you get 2/3 of your wages while you're out. You don't get your full wage. A police officer, on the other hand, gets paid 100% of their wages under the General Municipal Law, or called line of duty benefits.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. So when is a police officer eligible to sue for a line of duty injury, and how does that differ from standard workers' compensation process?
Well, there's one important difference. In general, to answer your question, police officers can sue anybody who was negligent that caused their accidents, or anybody who violated the law that caused their injuries. One important difference is under New York workers' compensation law, you can't sue your employer and you can't sue a coworker for negligence. However, the General Municipal Law trumps the workers' compensation law. So, for example, if a police officer's fellow employee or even someone from the city that they work for caused their injury, they can now sue. Why? Because even though workers' compensation law has what's called an exclusive remedy clause, which means that anybody who gets workers' compensation, that's their exclusive remedy against their employer. However, the general municipal law trumps that. That's what a couple of years ago, a Court of Appeals decision came out on that. So we've had a number of cases where, for example, police officers are injured in motor vehicle accidents by other police officers, and we're able to sue the city for that and the other police officers. Why? Because there's a violation of the vehicle and traffic law. So one of the big differences under a general municipal law claim, a police officer can actually sue the city if the city's at fault. Whereas a workers' compensation case, you can't sue your boss or your co-employee if they're at fault in the accident.
Are there situations in which a police officer can't make those claims and can't make those claims against the city and must pursue like a different way to get compensation for their injuries?
Well, it's kind of a vague question. In general, the only time that the general municipal law applies is if there's a violation of law. So if there's no violation of law, then a police officer obviously can't sue. Um, that's really it. So the triggering event has to be a violation of a law. But let's talk about the laws, though, because it's pretty broad. So, for example, it's not just a statute. It could be a city ordinance. It could be a local law. It could even be, general policies and standards that are actually, or even general orders. So it's very broad, the laws that can be utilized as a basis for a lawsuit.
Why do you think, this is maybe more of a philosophical question or something, but why do you think that they treat the police officers, as you said, actually more favorably, but why do they differ for other city workers and for other municipalities?
Well, I think because police officers put their own lives on the line for us. They are exposed to higher risks. So when they're combating crime and when they're taking actions that are required or that they're required to place themselves in situations of danger, those situations of danger should not be aggravated or made even worse by violations of law. So in other words, while they're trying to protect us from lawbreakers, they shouldn't be getting injured because someone else broke the law.
Do you represent very many police officers?
We represent a lot of police officers. We represent a lot of police officers in car accidents. We represent a lot of police officers in trip and fall cases where they're running after a perpetrator and the ground's broken or the stairs are no good. There's a number of regulations in New York's multiple dwelling law and multiple residence law that apply to, say, for example, stairwells. They have to have certain heights, certain features. Treading has to have certain lining on it so that you don't slip on the stairs. So there's a lot of general safety things that are in the law. There's municipal building codes or city building codes. So when an officer falls down the stairs, there's almost always some kind of violation that made the stairs themselves somewhat unsafe. And you can't expect a guy who's chasing after a felon with a gun to necessarily, watch every step and go down slowly. Right. So they have to take risks. That's why we have these laws, so that when they do get hurt because someone else broke the law or didn't comply with the law, so that they can be compensated.
Yeah, it's different taking a jog down a street versus running after a criminal on the street. Very, very different mindset.
Correct. And they have to place themselves in positions of danger. So that while they're placing themselves in these positions of danger, if they get hurt because someone else didn't comply with safety statutes or do things they're supposed to do, yeah, they should be compensated for that.
What is the procedure for, let's take that example. So a police officer is running after a perpetrator and trips and falls in front of a commercial building or something like that. What is their process? What do they need to do?
Well, first thing they need to do is obviously take pictures of what caused their injury. They have to report the line of duty accident so that they get their benefits. They're going to at some point be seen by a police surgeon. And you want to make sure that your injury is properly documented, how it happened, the location of where it happened. You have photographs of what caused the injury, and that the injuries themselves get properly diagnosed. Those are all the sort of things that police officers need to just make sure they do so that their cases can go forward smoothly and they have the evidence and information they need to prove their case.
Do they always need to consult an attorney? Are there situations where they go to their supervisor or that the department handles it, or is it always really important to have an attorney?
Well, the department is always going to handle the line of duty benefits, which consists of police officers' wages and medical. That gets handled between the police department and the union. However, the police department is not in the business of representing its officers in lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So trying to do a lawsuit yourself is like trying to perform surgery on yourself. You need someone who knows what they're doing to do it. And
Good idea.
especially if you're going to bring a claim, or if you're injured because of a fellow officer's lawsuit, you still have, even under the general municipal law, you still have to file what's called a notice of claim within 90 days of the accident, putting the city on notice that you're going to sue them. Likewise, if you're injured in a car accident with somebody who doesn't have insurance, or one of these e-bikers who are running around the city causing chaos, or they do a pullover and a traffic stop, and the guy takes off, and they get snagged while the guy's fleeing, they're going to have to go through their own insurance. And to do that, you have to submit an affidavit in a certain form to your own insurance company, letting them know that there is an uninsured motorist claim within a reasonable time after the accident. So these forms are not exactly handed out at the police department. So you really do need a lawyer to draft them properly.
Are you a fan of the e-bikes, Michael?
They're generating a lot of business for me, but I'm personally no.
Do you guys have those scooters too?
Oh, there's everywhere. There's e-bikes or scooters. All the delivery guys are using them. So they're very prominent, especially in Manhattan and some of the outer boroughs. All these guys are using e-bikes to deliver food. So the amount of potential for accidents is tremendous. There's whenever these guys get stopped by the police, if they try to take off, whatever, or there's any actions, the officers may not catch them, and they have to go through their own insurance.
I'm in Colorado near Denver, and there's so many of those scooters on just laying all over the place. I can imagine those could be kind of treacherous, just even when they're not being ridden for police officers. Are there challenges in proving a police officer's injury case that differs from a standard personal injury case, or are they kind of roll along similarly?
I'd say they're somewhat similar. The evidence that needs to be established to prove a violation of a law in a police officer's case isn't significantly different than the evidence that needs to prove, say, for example, a negligence case. So really, it's similar. There's a little bit of nuances because obviously, before you bring the case, you have to do a little research and find the law that you're relying on. For example, if a police officer even gets hurt in their own precinct, they fall down the stairs in their own precinct, and the stairs are no good, they can sue. But we have to be able to get in and get pictures of the condition, the stairs, maybe have someone measure them, see what code is. So the big difference with the police officer case compared to some of the other negligence cases is that before you file the case, you have to know what law was violated. And that takes a little bit of research.
Last episode, we discussed construction workers, and we kind of talked about how they might be hesitant to file claims. Do you find that police officers are similar in that respect?
I think police officers in general, some of them are more concerned about the potential for retaliation by the department. It's not something I generally see happening, for example, because when we file a case against the city on behalf of the police officer, it generally goes to corporation counsel, not the NYPD. So really, they operate in two different worlds. Anybody who's been injured on the job working as a police officer should not be afraid or intimidated into not filing a claim, even if it's against the city, because they really operate independently. The city especially is so big. The police department operates as one unit. Corporation counsel, which tend to handle these police officer cases, operates as another. And really, a lot of these corporation counsel guys are former DAs who are used to working with cops, and they're almost compassionate when they get these claims come in.
Yeah, I kind of wondered that, actually, because of the fact that, we all appreciate what police officers do for us and all that. I could totally see that, where the people involved are actually more compassionate to their situation than they might be to a civilian.
Correct. That's definitely happens quite often.
I could also see some of the cops, because cops are a lot of times fairly tough individuals. I could also see them not making claims maybe when they should, just because they're like, I'll rub some dirt on it, an old school mentality kind of thing. Do you find that is something that happens where people wait a while and then they're like, oh man, no, actually I'm hurt?
That does happen, but and that ends up hurting the case at the end of the day, because the longer people wait to get treatment and have it documented properly, the more they try to tough it out. That always gives the other side the opportunity to say, oh, you waited a week, waited 2 weeks, waited a month. That's not from this, or you really didn't get hurt. So really, by not pursuing something soon, you're really hurting yourself down the line, because you're giving the other side ammunition they wouldn't otherwise have, and really they shouldn't have.
How important is medical documentation? Do you recommend, like, if someone gets hurt, are you like, just go to a doctor, get a medical report?
Well, obviously with personal injury, what we have to do is we can get compensation for an injury. So the big question is, in any case, when people ask me, oh, what's my case worth? Well, what's your injury?
Yeah.
So obviously, whatever compensation I can get someone depends on what the injury is. And obviously, the more documentation you have, especially objective documentation of an injury, the better you're going to do at the end of the day, because you have the worst injury in the world, but if we don't have it documented, you're like suffering in silence.
I mentioned that we talked about construction workers in the last episode, and it kind of felt like maybe that they could do better for construction workers who are trying to, as far as safety is concerned, as far as handling cases for construction workers. It sounds kind of like maybe the system works better for police officers. Is that a fair assessment?
I wouldn't say that because, well, I think it's a little different because police officers, you're not dealing with a single employer that's controlling the safety aspects. With construction workers, you're dealing with employers or contractors who are supplying ladders, who are supplying scaffolds, who are deciding whether or not to provide bracing and shoring or to keep pathways. With police officers, more than not, they're out in the field and they're dealing with the general public.
Right.
And whatever conditions are in the general public, the police officers are exposed to. They're also having to interact with their fellow police officers. So at the end of the day, you're dealing with, not so much people who are in a supervisory position who are providing either equipment or tools or practices or telling what to do. They're dealing with the general public, and they're dealing with other police officers who may be involved in a pursuit, or other city entities or drivers or other people on the road. So it's a little different. It's a little different that in the sense that when we talk about construction workers, we're talking about companies. When we're talking about police officers, more often than not, we're talking about either people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing that results in the injury to the officers, or even small companies like buildings or building owners or property managers that maybe aren't keeping up the property.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Trial Talk with experienced attorney Michael Joseph. To connect with Michael, visit newyorktriallawyers.org. And please like and subscribe to our channel. We love having you be a part of our community. Michael, so good to see you again. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.